Is that really what you're wearing?" Richard's voice wasn't just a question, it was a judgment, sharp and cold as the December ice forming on their penthouse windows. He didn't look at his wife, Amelia, but at her reflection in the full-length mirror, his lip curled in disdain. The dress was simple, a deep navy silk that fell to the floor without adornment. It was elegant, timeless, and, in his eyes, a complete embarrassment. "We are attending the Metropolitan Gala, Amelia, not a PTA meeting. You look insignificant." "You will embarrass me." He turned away, missing the flicker of steel in his wife's quiet eyes. He had no idea that the insignificant woman he just mocked was the only reason he was even invited. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue was a monument to modern wealth, a stark landscape of white marble, glass, and polished steel. It overlooked Central Park, but the view was less a window and more a high-definition screensaver. Beautiful, distant, and cold. This was Richard's world. Amelia just lived in it. Their marriage, now entering its 5th year, had begun with a whirlwind romance. Richard, a rising star at Morgan Stanley, a man whose ambition was as sharp and tailored as his bespoke suits, had been charmed by Amelia's quiet grace. She was good stock, he'd told his colleagues, an old, understated family, though seemingly without the accompanying fortune. She was the perfect wife, placid, intelligent, and utterly undemanding. She provided a serene backdrop to his high-stress, high-stakes life. Lately, however, her serenity had begun to grate on him. His career had stalled. He was a managing director, but the partnership circle, the real power, remained just out of reach. He was 42, and men younger than him were leaping ahead. He felt the constant, gnawing pressure to perform. Not just in the boardroom, but in the ballroom. His life was a performance, and his wife, he felt, was forgetting her lines. "The Metropolitan Children's Hospital Gala is not just a party, Amelia," he'd said over breakfast, not lifting his eyes from the Wall Street Journal. "It's the event of the season. Charles Harrison will be there." Charles Harrison was the chairman of the hospital board, and, more importantly, the gatekeeper to a massive corporate account Richard was desperate to land. Landing the Harrison account wouldn't just secure his bonus, it would guarantee his promotion to partner. "I'm aware, Richard. I sent in our RSVP 2 weeks ago," Amelia replied, sipping her tea. "That's not what I mean." He finally lowered the paper, his blue eyes intense. "I mean appearance. This isn't one of your quiet charity lunches. I need you to... Try. Sophia is handling my table arrangement. She understands the stakes." Ah, Sophia. Her name hung in the air between them, sharp and metallic. Sophia was Richard's protégée at the bank, a woman 10 years younger than Amelia, with a ravenous ambition that matched Richard's own. She was all sharp angles, loud labels, and a laugh that seemed to echo with networking opportunities. Richard insisted their relationship was purely professional, but Amelia wasn't naive. She saw the late-night texts, the shared jokes, the way his eyes followed Sophia at company events. "I'm sure she does," Amelia said, her voice perfectly even. "I'll find something appropriate." "Appropriate isn't good enough. You need to look spectacular," he snapped, folding his paper. "I can't have my wife looking like a suburban mother while I'm trying to close the biggest deal of my career. Ask Sophia for help. She's wearing Balenciaga. She knows people." The implication was clear. You don't. Amelia said nothing. She simply watched as he adjusted his Patek Philippe watch, grabbed his briefcase, and left the marble foyer without a backward glance. For a long time, Amelia sat alone in the sterile silence of the $30 million penthouse she had paid for. Richard believed her family money was a small, dwindling trust fund, just enough to keep her comfortable. He had no idea of the reality. He had never bothered to ask. He saw her quiet life, her volunteer work at a downtown soup kitchen, her hours spent reading in the library, her simple, logo-free clothing as proof of her lack of drive. He mistook her silence for simplicity, her kindness for weakness. It had been a deliberate choice. When she first met Richard, Amelia, or rather, Amelia Westwood, was exhausted. She was the sole inheritor of the Westwood industrial fortune, a staggering 9-figure empire built by her reclusive father. For years, she had run the family's philanthropic arm, the Westwood Foundation, entirely from the shadows. She had moved to New York seeking anonymity, a chance to be just Amelia. She wanted, desperately, to be loved by someone who didn't know she could buy the building they were standing in. Richard had seemed like that person, but over the years, she realized he hadn't fallen in love with her. He'd fallen in love with the idea of her, a blank canvas on which to project his ideal image of a supportive, background wife. Now the Metropolitan Children's Hospital Gala was upon them. It was, as Richard had correctly stated, the event of the season. He was desperate to impress its chairman. What he didn't know, and what he had never, in 5 years, thought to ask, was what her connection to the hospital was. For the past 3 years, the Westwood Foundation had been the hospital's largest and only anonymous donor. She had personally overseen the funding and construction of their new $200 million pediatric oncology wing, and tonight, for the first time, the Foundation's mysterious benefactor was scheduled to appear in public to accept the hospital's gratitude. Amelia stood and walked to her closet, a room the size of a small apartment. She pushed past the rows of designer clothes Richard had bought for her, gaudy, flashy pieces that she never wore. In the back, she found what she was looking for. It was a dress by a small, independent London artisan. It was simple, elegant, and had cost more than Richard's car. It was perfect. The night of the gala arrived. The penthouse was filled with a frantic, crackling energy, all of it radiating from Richard. He had been in his dressing room for 2 hours, emerging in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. He looked like a movie star, and he knew it. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light of the skyline. "The car will be here in 20 minutes, he called out. "Amelia, are you ready? We cannot be late." Amelia emerged from her own dressing room. The navy silk dress settled around her like water. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant chignon. Her only jewelry was a pair of sapphire earrings that had belonged to her mother. She wore no necklace, letting the clean lines of the dress speak for themselves. She looked poised, serene, and, to Richard, infuriatingly plain. He stopped, his glass halfway to his lips. His face tightened. This was the moment the hook was built on. "Is that really what you're wearing?" The disdain in his voice was a physical blow. "I told you, Richard, I found something." "Found something?" "Found something in a thrift store." "Amelia, this is a joke." He walked over to her, circling her as if inspecting livestock. "There's no anything. No flair, no design. It's navy. You look like you're attending a funeral." My God, Sophia sent me a picture of her dress. It's a custom Versace, red, beaded. She looks like a star. That is what power looks like. "I am not Sophia, Richard," Amelia said, her voice dangerously quiet. "That is painfully obvious," he snapped. "Do you understand what is happening tonight? I am networking for our future. I need to walk in that room with a woman on my arm who commands respect, not pity. You look like your little trust fund finally ran out. You look cheap. Cheap." The word struck her. She thought of the checks she signed every month, the check that paid for the very scotch in his hand, the check that funded the hospital wing he was so desperate to be associated with. "I like the dress," she said, a thread of iron entering her tone. "You like it? Who cares what you like? It's not about you. It's about us. It's about the image we project." He ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. He walked to his dresser and picked up a black velvet box. He threw it onto the bed. "Here, I bought you this last week. Put it on. At least it might distract from, well, the rest of it." Amelia opened the box. Inside was a garish diamond necklace, all large stones and no subtlety. It was a classic new money piece, designed to shout its price tag from across the room. It was something Sophia would have loved. "It's not my style, Richard." "I don't care. Put it on. Or better yet, go change. Wear that gold thing I bought you for the awards dinner. The one you said was too much." "No," Amelia said. It was a simple word, but it landed with the force of a gavel. Richard stared at her, genuinely shocked. She never said no. "What did you say?" "I said no. I am wearing this dress, and I am not wearing that necklace." Richard's face flushed a deep, angry red. He stepped close to her, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You will do what I say, Amelia. You are my wife, and you will not embarrass me tonight. You are a liability. You're a quiet, boring woman with no ambition and no style, and frankly, I am sick of having to apologize for you. You're dragging me down." He grabbed her arm. "You will go and change, or I will go without you." Amelia looked at his hand on her arm. She didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze. "Then you should go without me, Richard, because I am not changing." He was stunned into silence by her defiance. He had pushed her, certain she would fold as she always did. But this was different. He saw something in her eyes he didn't recognize, not anger, but a profound, chilling indifference. "Fine," he spat, releasing her arm. "Fine. Come as you are. Come as the mousy little bore you are. But when Charles Harrison and his wife look at you like you're the help, don't come crying to me. I'll be at the bar, trying to salvage my reputation." He grabbed his coat. "I'll take the Mercedes. You can take an Uber. I don't want to be seen arriving with you." He slammed the door to the penthouse, leaving Amelia alone in the vast, silent room. She stood for a moment, the echo of the slam fading. The cruelty of his words, a liability, boring, embarrass me, should have shattered her. Instead, they felt like the final click of a lock falling into place. She picked up her phone, not to call an Uber, but to send a single text to a number saved as Mr. Clark. "I'm on my way. Please use the private entrance on 81st. I'll be arriving separately." The reply was instantaneous. "Of course, Miss Westwood. The chairman is eagerly awaiting your arrival." Amelia put on her coat, a simple cashmere wrap, just as understated as her dress, and walked out of the apartment she would never again call home. The facade of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was awash in blue and gold light for the gala. A long black carpet, not red, stretched from the curb, past a gauntlet of photographers from Vogue, Tatler, and the New York Times. The air was electric with the arrival of the city's elite. Richard's Mercedes S-Class pulled up precisely at 8. He stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks, a practiced, charming smile already fixed on his face. He posed for a moment, soaking in the flashbulbs. As he walked the carpet, he heard the photographers calling his name. "Richard! Richard Vaughan! This way!" He was, at least in this world, a known quantity. "Where's your lovely wife, Richard?" called a reporter from the Post. Richard's smile tightened slightly. Amelia wasn't feeling her best. "She may join later, but she insisted I come and support this wonderful cause." A perfect, sympathetic lie. He entered the great hall, which had been transformed into a glittering forest of white orchids and crystal. Waiters drifted by with trays of champagne. Richard took one, his eyes scanning the room, hunting for his target. He found him almost immediately. Charles Harrison, a man in his late 60s with a mane of white hair and an air of old-world authority, was standing near the grand staircase, looking anxiously at his watch. Before Richard could make his move, a sinuous arm linked with his. "Richard, darling, you made it." Sophia. She was a vision in the Versace he had coveted. The red dress was plastered to her body, a beacon of ambition. "You look incredible," he murmured, kissing her cheek. "You don't look so bad yourself," she purred. "Where's the lovely Amelia? Did she decide to wear her gardening clothes?" Richard let out a short, harsh laugh. "You're not far off. She's indisposed. It's for the best. Tonight is too important." "Absolutely," Sophia agreed, her eyes already casing the room. "There's Harrison. He looks nervous. I hear the big anonymous donor is showing up tonight, the one who built the new wing. They say it's some reclusive tech billionaire. Whoever it is, that's the person we need to meet." "Leave it to me," Richard said, squaring his shoulders. He and Sophia began their calculated drift toward the chairman. 10 minutes after Richard's flashy arrival, a discreet black Bentley Flying Spur, a car that cost 3 times as much as Richard's Mercedes but was designed to be invisible, pulled up to a private side entrance on 81st Street, far from the press. A man in a tuxedo, Mr. Clark, the hospital's head of development, was waiting. He opened the door before the driver could. "Ms. Westwood," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. "Welcome. We are so honored to have you here tonight." "Thank you, David," Amelia said, stepping out. "It's a beautiful evening. The chairman is just inside. He's been incredibly anxious to meet you in person, as has our entire board. I hope I haven't caused too much trouble with my anonymity," Amelia said with a small smile. "Not at all. You've saved this hospital. The trouble has been a pleasure." He escorted her through a private corridor, bypassing the check-in, the press, and the grand entrance. They emerged onto a private balcony overlooking the great hall. From here, Amelia could see the entire party. She saw the sea of designer gowns, the flashing of diamonds, the calculated smiles, and she saw Richard. He was standing with Sophia, who was laughing, her head tossed back, her hand resting possessively on Richard's forearm. They were looking at Charles Harrison, clearly waiting for a chance to pounce. Amelia watched them for a moment. She felt a surprising lack of emotion. There was no jealousy, no anger. It was just clarity. It was like looking at 2 strangers who had just confirmed everything she already knew. "Ms. Westwood?" Mr. Clark asked, concerned by her silence. "It's just Amelia, please, David, and I'm ready." "Excellent. Ms. Davies, our CEO, will be making her opening remarks in 5 minutes. She'll introduce you then. We have your seat reserved at the main table, with Mr. Harrison." "Actually," Amelia said, her eyes still on her husband below, "I think I'd rather stand at the back for the speech. I'm not fond of grand entrances." Mr. Clark looked confused. This was the opposite of every donor he'd ever met. But he nodded. "As you wish. This way." Down in the great hall, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The rumor that had been circulating for weeks was now confirmed. The Westwood benefactor was in the building. This anonymous entity had, in 36 months, become a legend in New York philanthropy. They had not just donated, they had surgically repaired the hospital's failing infrastructure, all culminating in the new pediatric wing. Richard, meanwhile, had finally managed to corner Charles Harrison. "Charles, a triumph. The event is a triumph," Richard said, clapping the older man on the shoulder. "Richard, good to see you," Harrison replied, his smile polite but strained. He was clearly distracted, his eyes darting toward the main stage. "Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it. Our firm, Morgan Stanley, is deeply committed to pediatric health. Deeply." This was a lie. Richard had blocked the firm's last 2 charitable donations to this very hospital, redirecting the funds to a golf tournament he favored. "That's good to hear," Harrison said, his attention elsewhere. Sophia, seeing the conversation stall, jumped in. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Sophia Knight, also with Mr. Vaughan. We were just saying how thrilled we are that the Westwood donor is finally being revealed. The buzz is incredible." This caught Harrison's attention. "Oh, it is. It truly is. We've been waiting for this moment for years. An incredible individual, incredibly humble." "Any hints on who it is?" Richard asked, trying to sound casual. "Is it one of the Silicon Valley boys, a new tech IPO?" Harrison chuckled. "You'll be surprised, Richard. We all were. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must get to the stage. It's almost time." As Harrison walked away, Richard scoffed. "Probably some 90-year-old dowager. Still, I need to get to him after the reveal. He'll be in a good mood." Sophia nodded, but she was scanning the crowd. "Where do you think your wife ran off to, anyway? Did she really go home?" "Probably," Richard said, taking another sip of champagne. "She can't handle rooms like this. She gets overwhelmed. It's pathetic, really. She has no stomach for this world." He looked around at the glittering crowd. Imagine being married to the plainest woman in the room. God, it's humiliating. He turned to Sophia, his expression softening. "After tonight, when I lock down Harrison, things are going to change. I promise." Sophia's smile was predatory. "I'll hold you to that, Richard." From the back of the hall, near a marble column, Amelia watched. She saw her husband, the man who had shared her bed for 5 years, laughing with his mistress. She saw him mock her to this other woman, and she felt the last thin thread of their marriage snap. The lights began to dim. A hush fell over the crowd. A woman in an elegant silver gown walked to the podium on the grand staircase. "Good evening, everyone," her voice boomed, clear and strong. "I am Dr. Alana Davies, the CEO of Metropolitan Children's Hospital. Welcome. Tonight, we are not just here to celebrate. We are here to give thanks." Richard and Sophia shuffled closer to the stage, wanting to be in the sight line of the main table. "For 5 years," Dr. Davies continued, "our hospital has dreamed of a new pediatric wing. We dreamed of a place where we could offer world-class oncology treatment to every child, regardless of their family's ability to pay. 2 years ago, that dream became a reality. It became a reality because of one anonymous, unbelievably generous source, the Westwood Foundation." A polite, intrigued applause rippled through the room. "This foundation," Dr. Davies said, her voice thick with emotion, "funded the entire project, from the blueprints to the final coat of paint. They did so without fanfare, without a single request for a plaque or a named building. They asked only that we do the work." The crowd was captivated. This was unprecedented. Tonight, after much persuasion, the founder of the Westwood Foundation has agreed to step out of the shadows and allow us to thank them publicly. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the greatest honor of my life to introduce to you the heart and soul of our new hospital, Ms. Amelia Westwood. The name hit the room like a shockwave. Amelia Westwood. For a fraction of a second, there was total, deafening silence. The name meant nothing to 99% of the room. It was not a tech billionaire. It was not a 90-year-old dowager. A single, powerful spotlight flared to life, illuminating the center of the grand staircase where a space had been left. But it was empty. Dr. Davies, looking slightly confused, leaned into the mic. "Ms. Westwood?" From the back of the room, a voice, calm and clear, replied, "I'm here, Alana." The spotlight operator, panicked, swung the beam across the crowd, searching. It swept over Richard and Sophia, who were staring, bewildered. And then it found her. Amelia was standing by the pillar, her simple navy dress seeming to glow under the intense light. She looked serene, unbothered by the 800 pairs of eyes that had suddenly fixed on her. In the front row, Charles Harrison beamed and began to applaud. "There she is!" The applause started, hesitant at first, then thundering as Dr. Davies and Mr. Harrison rushed from the stage to greet her. "Amelia, you preferred the back, indeed," Harrison boomed, taking her hand and kissing it. "You're a rogue." "I didn't want to trip," Amelia said with a smile. They began to escort her, this insignificant woman, through the sea of stunned socialites. The path parted for her. Everyone was staring. The simple dress no longer looked plain. It looked like a statement. It was the uniform of someone who had nothing to prove. But no one was more stunned than Richard. He was frozen. His champagne glass, forgotten, slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was obscenely loud in the brief lull in applause. "Richard," Sophia whispered, her face pale. "Richard, who is that? They said Amelia Westwood." Richard couldn't speak. His mouth was dry. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He was looking at his wife, the woman he had called a liability not an hour ago, being escorted to the stage by the very man he was desperate to impress. He watched as Charles Harrison himself held the microphone for her. That's my wife," he choked out. Sophia's head snapped toward him. Her eyes, moments ago so full of adoration, were now wide with a horrified, dawning comprehension. Your wife? That's Amelia." Amelia reached the podium. She looked out over the crowd, her gaze calm, her poise absolute. She was not the meek, quiet woman who decorated his penthouse. This was a commander. Her eyes swept the room, and for one brief, devastating moment, they met Richard's. She held his gaze. There was no anger, no triumph. There was just dismissal. She saw him, and she looked away, as if he were just another face in the crowd. That, more than anything, broke him. "Thank you, Alana. Thank you, Charles," Amelia began, her voice resonating with a warmth and authority that Richard had never heard. "My father, Marcus Westwood, was a brilliant man, but he was also a private one. He believed that great wealth was not a reward, but a responsibility. When he passed, he left me with that responsibility, and with one instruction: do good, but do it quietly." Richard's blood ran cold. Marcus Westwood, the industrialist, the reclusive, mythical titan of industry who had died years ago. The Forbes articles had estimated his worth in the billions. He had always assumed his wife's family was some distant, poor relation. "For years I honored that," Amelia continued. "The Westwood Foundation has operated anonymously, believing the work was more important than the name behind it. But Dr. Davies convinced me that stepping forward, just this once, might inspire others to do the same. This wing isn't from me. It's from every nurse who stays late, every doctor who refuses to give up, and every child who fights a battle no one should have to. I am merely a steward of a resource. They are the heroes. Thank you," she finished. The room was silent for a beat, then erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roaring, thundering, standing ovation. People were on their feet, tears in their eyes. Richard remained seated, his legs unable to move. He was a ghost at his own funeral. Sophia was gone. He didn't even see her leave. She had seen the new landscape, recognized her own irrelevance in it, and vanished into the crowd. Amelia, Ms. Westwood, was swarmed. Mayors, senators, tech moguls, everyone was pushing to get to her, to shake her hand. Richard just sat there, amidst the shattered glass of his champagne flute. The rest of the gala was a blur for Richard. He was suddenly the most visible and, simultaneously, the most invisible man in the room. He could feel the stares, the whispers. That's her husband. Vaughan, from Morgan Stanley. How did he land her? I saw him with Sophia Knight all night. The idiot. His colleagues from the bank, who had been avoiding him earlier, now approached with a sickening, false enthusiasm. Richard, my man, you've been holding out on us. Your wife. My goodness. Richard just nodded, his face a mask of sweat. He watched Amelia. She was holding court, not like a socialite, but like a queen. She moved through the room with grace, shaking hands, listening intently. She was discussing logistics with a senator, then laughing with Dr. Davies. She was radiant. The simple navy dress, which he had mocked, was now the talk of the room. Vogue's editor was overhead, asking who the designer was, calling it the definition of modern power. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw a break in the crowd and stumbled toward her. He had to fix this. He had to spin this. Amelia, he said, his voice hoarse. He tried to put his hand on her arm. She moved away from his touch, her movement so subtle it was almost imperceptible. But to him, it was a slap. She turned to him, her expression polite, as if addressing a stranger who had asked for directions. Richard, are you enjoying the evening? Amelia, my God, you were magnificent. He was desperate, fawning. Why didn't you tell me? Westwood, all this time? You never asked, Richard, she said simply, her voice void of accusation. It was just a statement of fact. I don't understand. The small trust fund. You assumed, she said. You saw my simple clothes and my quiet life, and you assumed I was insignificant. I believe that was your word. Richard flinched as if struck. No, Amelia, I was stressed. I was testing you. It was a joke. You know I didn't mean it. Amelia's polite mask didn't waver. The joke, as you call it, was very illuminating. Please, he begged, his voice dropping to a whisper. My God, Amelia, we can be the biggest couple in New York. The power we'll have. The Harrison account. Before she could reply, Charles Harrison himself walked up, his arm extended not to Richard, but to Amelia. Amelia, my dear, the board is having a private toast. We need you. He then looked at Richard, as if noticing him for the first time. His eyes were arctic. Ah, Richard, Harrison said, his tone dripping with newfound condescension. I was surprised to learn you were Amelia's husband. You are, without a doubt, the luckiest man I have ever met. He leaned in, his voice dropping. And I must say, perhaps the most foolish. I was standing not 10 feet away when you arrived. I heard you tell that reporter your wife was not feeling her best. Then I saw you all night with that garish young woman from your office. You, sir, have a talent for backing the wrong horse. Richard's face drained of all color. Harrison smiled, a cold, sharp expression. As for the Harrison account you've been chasing, don't bother. The Westwood Foundation, as it happens, holds a significant position on my board. Amelia and I have been working together for years. I'll be moving my portfolio. I prefer to do business with people I trust, and I certainly don't trust a man who doesn't even know his own wife." Harrison turned his back on the stunned banker. "Come, Amelia. Let's leave Mr. Vaughan to his networking." Amelia gave Richard one last, fleeting look. It was a look of pity. Then she turned, took Charles Harrison's arm, and walked away, leaving Richard standing alone in the center of the room, a pariah in his own tuxedo. The ride home was a symphony of silence, punctuated only by the purr of the Bentley's engine and the quiet, measured tones of Amelia's voice. Richard sat pressed against the passenger door, the plush leather feeling like a cold, slick wall. He was a prisoner in a car he now realized was never his. Amelia, this stranger who was his wife, was on the phone. "Yes, Robert, Forbes has the exclusive for the morning," she said, her voice calm, as if she were discussing brunch plans. "I want the narrative focused on the hospital's new treatment protocols, not on me." "Yes, but the Wall Street Journal can have the financial follow-up. They'll be interested in the Foundation's new ethical investment criteria." "That's correct. We're divesting from any funds that don't meet a AAA ESG rating. Yes, that includes Morgan Stanley's primary energy fund. They've been warned for 2 quarters. This is just the execution." Richard's blood turned to ice. His fund, the one he'd built his reputation on. She wasn't just a donor. She was a market-moving whale, and she was about to beach him. He tried to speak. "Amelia," he croaked, reaching a trembling hand across the console. She didn't look at him. She simply held up a single, elegant finger, a universal sign for wait, and he felt his entire body recoil as if she had slapped him. The gesture was so casual, so dismissive, it was more profound than any shout. She continued, "Thank you, Robert. I'll expect the drafts by 7. She hung up and immediately dialed another number. Richard watched, his mind a frantic, screaming void. He was trying to calculate. Billions. Marcus Westwood, the reclusive titan? The man was a myth, a Forbes cover story from a decade ago. He had married that? He had mocked. He had told Amelia Westwood that her dress was insignificant. He felt a bubble of hysterical laughter rise in his chest, so sharp and painful he almost choked on it. "David," she said, her voice warming instantly. "Yes, I'm just on my way home. It was a wonderful night. You did the real work. Oh, Charles is a dare. Yes, he mentioned his portfolio. It's his personal decision, of course, but I appreciate his solidarity. Please send my best to the board. We'll speak on Monday." She hung up again. The silence that fell in the car was heavier than a vault door. "Amelia," Richard tried again, his voice pathetic, a stranger's voice. "Amelia, my God, I don't—" "Be quiet, Richard," she said, not unkindly, but with the flat finality of a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "We're almost home." She made one final call. "Mark, I'm 5 minutes out." "Yes, he is with me. Please be discreet. I want him escorted from the premises." "No, he won't be violent. Just lost. Have his personal effects from the front closet ready to go with him. The rest will be boxed. Escorted from the premises. His home, his penthouse." The Bentley glided into the private subterranean garage. The attendant, a young man named Ben, who always jogged over to take Richard's keys and compliment the Mercedes, now simply stood by the elevator. He opened the Bentley's back door for Amelia, his head bowed. "Good evening, Miss Westwood. A pleasure to see you, ma'am." He didn't even look at Richard. The elevator ride to the penthouse was the longest 60 seconds of Richard's life. He stared at their reflection in the polished bronze doors. He looked haggard, his Tom Ford tux suddenly looking like a cheap costume. His face was slick with a cold sweat. She just looked poised, composed, like she was returning from a board meeting, not from the public detonation of her marriage. "Amelia, we can talk about this," he whispered as the numbers climbed. This is just a misunderstanding. A colossal mistake." The elevator chimed, and the doors opened directly into the vast, white marble foyer. The apartment was silent, the skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "There is no misunderstanding, Richard," Amelia said, stepping out onto the marble. Richard stumbled in after her, his feet heavy, his bravado, his entire identity bleeding out onto the priceless rugs. "Amelia, please, talk to me." She didn't turn. She walked to the enormous minimalist bar, the one he always used to impress clients. She opened a bottle of Voss water and poured it into a crystal glass. She didn't offer him one. The exclusion was a deliberate, calculated cut. "What is there to say?" she asked, finally turning to face him. "Why?" he burst out, the word tearing from his throat. "Why would you do this? Hide this from me? Your husband? Westwood? Marcus Westwood's daughter?" He let out that high-pitched, hysterical laugh. You let me go on about my bonus?" "My God, my bonus! It's probably what you find in your couch cushions, isn't it? It's pocket change." He was pacing now, gesturing wildly. You let me mock you. Tonight! That dress!" His voice cracked. I'm an idiot. I know. I get it. You proved your point. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You won, okay? You won. Is that what you wanted? To make me look like the world's biggest fool?" He grabbed his hair. "But it was a test, right? This whole marriage, it was some sick, twisted test of my character. And I failed. I failed, okay? I admit it. I was stressed. The Harrison deal. Sophia. She's nobody. She's an ambitious kid. She means nothing. I was playing the game. You know the game." "A test?" Amelia's voice cut through his hysterics, and he stopped, frozen. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. It was lethal. "Do you think I have time for that? Do you think my life is some high school play, Richard? This wasn't a test. This was just a Tuesday, the day it all finally came due." She set her glass down with a precise, quiet click. "You ask why I hid it. I didn't hide it. I just was. I was Amelia. I came to New York to escape the name, to find one person, one who would see me, who would love me for my quiet life and my simple clothes. For a little while, I thought that was you. I thought you loved me." "I did. I do," he pleaded, taking a step toward her. "No," she said, and the word was a physical barrier. "You loved a concept. You loved a beautiful, blank, well-bred wife who came from good stock. A wife who would ask no questions, have no opinions, and provide a placid backdrop for your important life. You didn't marry me, Richard. You acquired me. I was your highest status acquisition. A wife who was pretty, but not too pretty. Smart, but not too smart. And most importantly, not ambitious enough to overshadow you." He flinched. "That's not true, isn't it?" she challenged. "You've been ashamed of me for at least a year. Ashamed I didn't network. Ashamed I didn't schmooze. Ashamed I didn't dress like Sophia in Balenciaga and Versace. Ashamed I preferred to volunteer at the kitchen rather than chair a meaningless luncheon. You were ashamed of me. Tonight, you just finally said the quiet part out loud. You will embarrass me. A liability. Insignificant. You said I looked cheap." She scoffed, a dry, bitter sound. "You're worried about your bonus. Let's talk about your finances, shall we? This penthouse. You told your colleagues you bought it after a killer year in futures. I signed the deed. It's owned by a Delaware-based holding company that my father set up in 1992. My holding company. Richard's mouth went dry. That Mercedes S-Class you're so proud of, the one you used to arrive in style tonight, without me? It's leased by my family office, as is the Porsche 911 you keep at the Hamptons house. Oh, and the Hamptons house, the one you tell everyone you inherited from a distant uncle? My father bought it in 1998. It was my mother's favorite place. You just moved in. She was closer now, her eyes sweeping over him, inventorying every lie he was wearing. And this, her gaze dropped to his wrist. That Patek Philippe, the one you tell people was a gift from the Morgan Stanley board for outstanding performance. It was a 5th anniversary gift, Richard, from me. Paid for with a dividend check from the Westwood Foundation, the same foundation you just watched me represent, the same foundation you've been, for 5 years, unknowingly, living off of. She paused, letting the weight of it all crush him. You are not a partner in this marriage. You have been a dependent. He couldn't breathe. He sank onto one of the sterile white sofas he had always pretended to like. Amelia, my God, I'll change. I swear, I can change. I see it all now. I see. You. It's you I love. It's you. The power. It's you. Stop, she commanded. Just stop. You don't love me. You love this. She swept her hand around the glittering, empty room. You love the idea of being married to Amelia Westwood. You're just rebranding. You're making a new sales pitch, and frankly, it's pathetic. It's over. A last, desperate spark of his old self ignited. The fighter. The banker. The prenup! He scrambled, his voice hoarse. I'll contest it. I'm entitled. Spousal support. Amelia's laugh was the coldest sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of a safe clicking shut. The prenup, the 80-page document your top-tier lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell drafted, the one they billed you for, and that you then expensed to your corporate account? Richard's face went white. Richard, my lawyers. The Westwood lawyers. They're the ones who wrote it. They just let your team review it. They let them change a few clauses about household pets and summer holiday schedules. It made you feel powerful, I suppose. You signed it without even reading Appendix B, didn't you? The miscellaneous assets addendum. The one listing the foundation's premarital holdings. You just saw Amelia's small personal trust fund on page 1 and assumed you were the breadwinner. You assumed you were the big dog. It's ironclad. It stipulates that in the event of a dissolution, especially one based on, and I quote, public marital misconduct or gross personal humiliation, you get nothing. You keep your personal effects, the contents of your personal bank account, and that is all. You have 24 hours to vacate all properties. Public misconduct, infidelity, Sophia and I, we never, he stammered, the lie weak and thin. Don't lie! Her voice finally, cracked like a whip, and he physically recoiled. I don't care if you slept with her. You humiliated me. You arrived with her on your arm. You stood with her, your mistress, and you mocked me. You did it in front of Charles Harrison, in front of my entire board, in front of the press. That is public, and it is gross. And it is, thank God, grounds for immediate termination. The penthouse doorbell chimed, a soft, polite, 3-note sound. And that, Amelia said, her composure snapping back into place, would be my security team. Richard's head snapped up. His heart was a trapped bird against his ribs. Security? You called security. On me? In my own. In our home. It's my home, Richard. And you are trespassing. The doors to the private elevator opened, and two large men in dark, impeccably tailored suits stepped into the foyer. They were not bouncers. They were ex-Secret Service, with earpieces and the quiet, immovable presence of men who handled problems far larger than Richard. They nodded once at Amelia. Miss Westwood. Then they turned to him. Mr. Vaughan, the lead one said, his voice polite but unyielding. We're here to escort you to your vehicle. A flicker of desperate hope. My Mercedes? Richard asked, his voice a pathetic squeak. No, sir. The Mercedes is a leased asset of the Westwood Corporation. It stays here, the man, Mark, replied, as if reading from a script. We're escorting you to a car service that will take you to a hotel of your choosing. Ms. Westwood has prepaid for one night at the Pierre, the final, perfect insult. A 5-star hotel, but as a one-night charitable dismissal. This is... Richard was hyperventilating. He looked at Amelia, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost primal. This was real. My things, he stammered. Your personal effects from the front closet are in a garment bag downstairs, Mark said. The rest, your clothes, your golf clubs, your Peloton, will be boxed by a white glove service and delivered to your office at Morgan Stanley tomorrow morning. My office, my job. The final straw. Richard shrieked, lurching to his feet, the last of his composure shattering. Amelia, you can't! That call! Divesting! Harrison, you'll ruin me! You'll destroy me! I'll be nothing! This was the moment, the apex of his panic. Amelia walked right up to him, stopping so close he could see the sapphire fire in her eyes, the ones he'd always thought were just a dull, placid blue. You were already nothing, Richard, she said, her voice a quiet, devastating whisper. You were just well-dressed. You built your entire life on a foundation of appearances. You sneered at me for my simple life. But my life is real. My work is real. The dress I wore tonight, it was made by a woman in London whose family business I saved from bankruptcy. The hospital wing, it will save the lives of children. Your life, your entire life, was a collection of expensive trinkets and cheap relationships, a house of cards. You worried about being embarrassed? You are the embarrassment. You're a man who had everything, a home, a partner who loved him, a future you couldn't even conceive of. And you traded it all. For what? For a chance to impress a man at a party? For a cheap thrill with a woman who will be gone by morning? She shook her head, a small, sad gesture. The problem, Richard, wasn't the foundation. It was that you never bothered to check what was underneath. Not with me, and not with yourself. She turned to her security team. Mark, please, show Mr. Vaughan out. Richard was sobbing now. Not loud, but a hitched, broken, pathetic sound. Amelia, please, just one more chance. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He reached for her, his hand outstretched. Don't touch me, she said, without raising her voice. Mark gently, but with immovable firmness, placed a hand on Richard's chest. Sir, let's go. Richard looked around the vast, marble room. The cold, sterile penthouse he had always secretly hated, had always felt was too much. He now realized it was the only thing that had been holding him up. He was led out. He didn't resist. He was a puppet with his strings cut. He looked back one last time at the woman in the simple navy dress. She was just watching. The elevator doors chimed. They closed. He was gone. Amelia stood in the foyer for a full minute. The silence of the penthouse was absolute. It was no longer cold. It was just quiet. She walked to the great glass window, the one Richard had always used as his backdrop, and looked out over Central Park. The city lights glittered like a carpet of fallen stars. Her city. She wasn't crying. She wasn't triumphant. She was just breathing. She picked up her phone. She made one more call. Robert, hi. Yes, one more thing. I'll need a statement prepared for Morgan Stanley's board in the morning. No, not about the divestment. About my husband. It seems Mr. Vaughan will be taking an immediate and indefinite leave of absence from the bank. Yes, for personal reasons. I'm sure they'll understand. Thank you. Good night. She hung up. She walked to the bar and took off the sapphire earrings that had belonged to her mother, placing them gently on the marble. She looked at her reflection in the dark, floor-to-ceiling glass. For the first time in 5 years, the woman looking back at her wasn't Richard's quiet, simple, insignificant wife. It was Amelia Westwood, and she was finally home. That night, Richard Vaughan lost everything. He lost his home, his wife, and by the time the markets opened on Monday, his job. Charles Harrison's public move, combined with the quiet divestment of the Westwood Foundation, made him toxic. Sophia, a true survivor, landed on her feet, quietly transferring to the London office. But this story isn't about Richard. It's about Amelia. It's about the quiet strength that is so often mistaken for weakness. It's a reminder that a person's value is never, ever measured by the label on their dress, but by the content of their character and the quiet integrity of their actions. Amelia Westwood went on to become one of the most powerful and respected voices in global philanthropy, no longer in the shadows. She learned that you cannot build a real life on a false foundation, and that the only person you ever need to prove your worth to is yourself. What did you think of Amelia's story? Does it remind you of anyone you know? We all have moments where we feel underestimated. Share your own story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, please don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true life stories every week. Thank you for listening. He was a titan of industry, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. She was his elegant, intelligent wife, the silent architect of his empire. But in the glittering, hollow world of New York's elite, loyalty is a commodity, and respect is a luxury not everyone can afford. One fateful night, at the city's most prestigious charity gala, under the watchful eyes of the powerful and the privileged, he made a choice. To appease his new flame, a woman draped in diamonds and ambition, he raised his hand to the wife who had built him. A single, sharp slap that echoed louder than the orchestra. He thought it was the end of an argument. He had no idea it was the beginning of his end, because while he slept soundly that night, she was igniting a fire that would burn his entire world to the ground. The Starlight Charity Gala was the apex of the Manhattan social calendar, a glittering spectacle held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, dripped light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet. To the outside world, Damien and Catherine Blackwood were the evening's reigning couple. He, the CEO of Blackwood Innovations, a tech behemoth he'd built from the ground up, was a man carved from ambition and arrogance. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a cold, calculating blue, and his smile a weapon he wielded with practiced ease. Catherine, his wife of 10 years, was his perfect counterpart, or so it seemed. Graceful and poised, with intelligent hazel eyes that saw far more than they let on, she possessed a quiet strength that most people mistook for meekness. She wore an emerald silk gown that shimmered like liquid moonlight, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She had been the first investor in Damien's dream, not with money, but with intellect. Her Wharton MBA and razor-sharp strategic mind had transformed his raw coding talent into a multi-billion-dollar empire. She had drafted the business plans, navigated the early-stage funding rounds, and architected the corporate structure. He was the face. She was the foundation. A foundation he had begun to treat as little more than pavement to be trod upon. The source of that disrespect was currently clinging to his arm, a vibrant slash of crimson in the muted elegance of the ballroom. Her name was Seraphina Munro, a model-turned-influencer whose ambition was as sharp and dangerous as the stilettos on her feet. She laughed a little too loudly, her scarlet lips perpetually curved in a predatory smile. She was everything Catherine was not, ostentatious, demanding, and utterly transparent in her desires. And Damien, a man terrified of losing the status he'd fought so ruthlessly to attain, was utterly captivated by her public performance of adoration. "Darling," Seraphina purred, her fingers tracing the lapel of Damien's Tom Ford tuxedo. "Mr. Abernathy from the Times is watching us. We should give him something to write about." She tilted her head towards a corner where several high-profile investors, including the notoriously shrewd Robert Chen of Chen Capital, were in conversation. "Go on, Damien. Remind them who the king of this city is." Damien's chest puffed out. He thrived on such validation. Catherine watched, a familiar ache tightening in her chest. She saw the subtle way he preened under Seraphina's gaze, the way he subtly angled his body away from her, his own wife, as if she were a relic of a past he was eager to shed. "In a moment, my dear," Damien said, his eyes scanning the room. "First, I need to ensure everything is perfect." His gaze fell on Catherine. "Catherine, did you confirm the seating arrangement with the event planner? I specifically said I wanted to be at the same table as Senator Thompson." "Yes, Damien," Catherine replied, her voice calm and even, betraying none of her inner turmoil. "We are at table 1, with the Senator and Mrs. Thompson, as you requested. I confirmed it myself an hour ago." Seraphina let out a small, condescending laugh. "Always so efficient, aren't we? Like a perfect little assistant." The barb struck its target. Catherine's jaw tightened, but she refused to give Seraphina the satisfaction of a reaction. Damien, however, either missed the malice or chose to ignore it. He was too focused on his own performance. For the next hour, Catherine played her role flawlessly. She smiled. She engaged in polite conversation about art auctions and summering in the Hamptons. She deflected intrusive questions about Damien's latest, rumored acquisition with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. All the while, she was acutely aware of Damien and Seraphina, a garish duo moving through the crowd. She saw him whisper in Seraphina's ear, saw the possessive hand he placed on the small of her back, a public declaration for all to see. The tension finally snapped later in the evening, near the marbled archway leading to the terrace. Catherine had been speaking with Marcus Thorne, the COO of Blackwood Innovations, and one of the few people who knew the true extent of her contributions to the company. "The quarterly projections are looking aggressive, Catherine," Marcus said, his voice low. "Damien is pushing the R&D department to its limits. I'm worried we're heading for a bubble." "I've seen the data, Marcus," she said quietly. "He's chasing headlines, not sustainable growth. I've warned him. He doesn't listen to anyone anymore, Marcus lamented, his gaze flicking nervously towards Damien, who was approaching them with Serafina in tow. What are you two whispering about? Damien's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. Just discussing the quarterly numbers, Damien, Marcus said quickly. Serafina slid her arm around Damien's waist. Don't let them bore you with business, darling. It's a party. She then looked directly at Catherine, her eyes glittering with malice. You know, Catherine, you should really try to enjoy yourself. You look so tense. It adds years to your face. Catherine met her gaze, her composure unwavering. Thank you for your concern, Serafina, but I find that worrying about the health of a $10 billion company is a more productive use of my time than worrying about a few wrinkles. The comeback was swift, precise, and it hit its mark. A flicker of fury crossed Serafina's perfectly made-up face. She turned to Damien, her lower lip trembling theatrically. Damien, did you hear that? She's insulting me. She's always so cold, so superior. Damien's face darkened. In his mind, Catherine's sharp intellect, once his greatest asset, had become a threat. Her quiet competence felt like a judgment on his loud insecurities. Serafina's manufactured vulnerability was a balm to his fragile ego. He looked from Serafina's pouting face to Catherine's calm, unreadable expression. In front of Marcus, in front of anyone who might be watching from the periphery, he needed to assert his authority. He needed to prove who held the power. Apologize to her, Catherine, he commanded, his voice low and menacing. Catherine's blood ran cold. I will not. I have nothing to apologize for. I said, apologize. No, Damien. It was her quiet defiance that broke him. It was the fact that she wasn't cowering. She wasn't afraid. To him it felt like the ultimate betrayal. He saw Serafina looking at him, her eyes wide, waiting. He felt the phantom eyes of the entire New York elite upon him. In that single, terrible moment, his vanity and his cruelty won. He raised his hand. The sound of the slap was sharp, a brutal crack that cut through the murmur of the Gala. Catherine's head snapped to the side, the sting blossoming on her cheek like a hot, poisonous flower. A collective gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. Marcus Thorne froze, his face a mask of horror. For a moment, there was absolute silence, a pocket of stunned disbelief in the heart of the opulent ballroom. Catherine slowly turned her head back to face him. There were no tears in her eyes. There was only a terrifying, crystalline clarity. She looked at Damien, not as her husband, but as a stranger, an enemy. She saw the flicker of shock in his own eyes, as if his hand had acted of its own accord, quickly replaced by a stubborn, defensive glare. She looked at Serafina, who had the decency to look momentarily stunned before a flicker of triumph settled in her eyes. Without a word, Catherine turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. Her back was straight, her head held high. Each step was deliberate, measured, taking her away from the wreckage of her marriage, through the sea of shocked and whispering faces, and out of the grand ballroom into the cool night air. Damien watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had made his point. He had asserted his dominance. He turned to a shaken Serafina and forced a smile. Now, where were we? He asked, his voice a little too loud, a little too brittle. He had no idea that the sound of that slap was not an ending, but the starting pistol for a war he was utterly unprepared to fight. The taxi ride from the Pierre to their Upper East Side penthouse was a blur of city lights smearing against the cold glass. Catherine sat perfectly still in the back seat, one hand resting in her lap, the other pressed against the lingering, phantom heat on her cheek. The sting had subsided, replaced by a profound and chilling numbness. It was the numbness of a limb that has been severed, the shock preceding the agony. She felt strangely disconnected from the woman in the emerald gown, the woman who had just been publicly humiliated by her own husband. That woman was a character she had played for a decade. Tonight, the performance had ended. When the taxi pulled up to the imposing limestone facade of their building, the doorman, a kind-faced man named George, rushed to open her door. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood. You're home early." His eyes widened slightly as he saw her face, the faint red mark just beginning to bloom on her cheekbone. To his credit, his professional mask didn't slip. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, George. Thank you," she said, her voice a monotone. But as she walked across the marble lobby, she knew nothing would ever be fine again. The private elevator opened directly into their penthouse. It was a monument to Damien's success, a sprawling space of glass, chrome, and minimalist furniture, with a panoramic view of Central Park. It was cold, impersonal, and curated for magazine spreads. It had never felt like a home. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. She walked through the silent, cavernous rooms, her heels clicking an unnervingly loud rhythm on the polished concrete floors. She didn't cry. The time for tears felt 1,000 miles away. What she felt instead was a slow, creeping rage, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It wasn't the wild, screaming rage of a wounded animal. It was the focused, calculating fury of a grandmaster whose opponent has just made a fatal, unforgivable blunder. The slap wasn't the cause, it was the catalyst. It was the physical manifestation of 1,000 smaller betrayals, 1,000,000 moments of being diminished, ignored, and taken for granted. It was the culmination of every time he had taken credit for her ideas, dismissed her concerns as nagging, and paraded his affairs as trophies of his masculine prowess. He hadn't just struck her, he had tried to erase her. She walked into their shared walk-in closet, a space larger than most New York apartments. On one side were Damien's meticulously organized rows of designer suits and shoes. On the other, her own collection of elegant, understated pieces. She ignored them all. She went to the back, to a locked safe, hidden behind a full-length mirror. She keyed in the code, not their anniversary, not his birthday, but the date she had finalized the patent for the core algorithm that had launched Blackwood Innovations. An algorithm she had written. Inside the safe were her personal documents, some jewelry, and a sleek, encrypted hard drive. She took only the hard drive and a single, slim folio of documents. She then walked into the master bedroom and took a small, leather-bound journal from her nightstand. It was filled with her handwriting, notes, ideas, and strategic plans for the company, many of which Damien had later presented as his own. She didn't pack a suitcase full of clothes. That was what a fleeing victim did. She was not a victim. She was a combatant preparing for battle. She took only a single, expensive-looking leather duffel bag. Into it, she placed the hard drive, the journal, the folio, her laptop, and a toiletry bag with only the essentials. The emerald gown she was wearing felt like a costume from another life. She stripped it off, letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin. She changed into a simple, severe black pantsuit, a crisp white silk blouse, and practical, low-heeled Chanel pumps. It was armor. Her phone buzzed. It was Damien. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Texts began to pour in. "Catherine, where are you? We need to talk. You're overreacting." The final one, sent minutes later, was the most telling. Don't do anything stupid. Think of the company's reputation. His reputation. Not her pain, not their marriage. The company, the entity she had built. A bitter smile touched her lips. Oh, she was thinking of the company. She was thinking of it very, very carefully. She made one phone call. Jessica Riley, a sharp, alert voice, answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. Jessica was her oldest friend, a shark of a divorce lawyer from the prestigious firm of Cromwell, Stern and Vance. The Vance was her father. "Jess, it's me." "Kat, what's wrong? I heard what happened at the gala. My colleague David was there. He called me." "Are you okay?" "He slapped me, Jess. In public." Catherine's voice was steady, devoid of self-pity. There was a pause, and then Jessica's voice turned to steel. "Where are you?" "At the penthouse. I'm leaving now." "Good. Don't engage with him. Don't answer his calls. Where are you going?" "I've booked a suite at the Carlisle, under my maiden name." Vance. The name felt good on her tongue. It was her own. "Okay. I'll meet you there in 40 minutes. We'll start the paperwork." "No," Catherine said firmly. "This isn't about divorce papers. Not yet. That's a skirmish. I'm planning a war." Jessica was silent for a moment, processing. She knew Catherine better than anyone. She knew her friend's calm exterior hid a formidable intellect and an iron will. "Okay," she said slowly. "What's the first move?" "I'm going to need you to look over a non-disclosure agreement. A very, very restrictive one. And I need to get in touch with an old acquaintance. I need you to find the best way to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning. An urgent one." She took a deep breath. "The name is Alexander Sterling, of Sterling Capital." Jessica let out a low whistle. Alexander Sterling was a legend on Wall Street, a so-called vulture capitalist to his enemies, a visionary investor to his allies. His firm was known for aggressive, often hostile, takeovers of undervalued or poorly managed tech companies. They were also Blackwood Innovation's most feared competitor. "Sterling," Jessica said, her voice a mix of shock and admiration. "Kat, what are you planning?" "Damien thinks the company is his greatest strength," Catherine said, walking towards the elevator, her duffel bag in hand. "He's about to find out that it's his greatest vulnerability. And I know where all the cracks are. After all, I'm the one who papered over them." She ended the call, stepped into the elevator, and descended from the glass tower for the last time. As the door slid shut, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. The woman staring back at her was not the broken wife of Damien Blackwood. It was Catherine Vance, and she was ready to reclaim everything he had taken from her, and more. The shattering was over. The reconstruction was about to begin. The Carlisle Hotel, with its old-world elegance and discreet service, was a world away from the cold modernity of Damien's penthouse. It was a fortress of quiet luxury, the perfect staging ground for what was to come. Catherine's suite, registered under the name Vance, was opulent but comforting, with heavy silk curtains and classic furniture that seemed to absorb the sounds and chaos of the city outside. She didn't sleep. Fueled by adrenaline and 2 decades of suppressed ambition, she worked through the night. Her laptop was open, the encrypted hard drive connected. On the screen were the unvarnished truths of Blackwood Innovations, not the polished PR-spun versions presented to shareholders, but the raw data, suppressed R&D failures, over-leveraged acquisitions, and most damningly, a series of creative accounting practices Damien had insisted upon to inflate their quarterly earnings. Catherine had argued against them, warning that they were a house of cards. Now she was grateful for his arrogance. He had handed her the very wind she needed to blow it all down. Beside the laptop lay her leather-bound journal. She methodically cross-referenced her handwritten notes, strategic plans, market analysis, software architecture ideas, with the company's official development roadmaps. The evidence was irrefutable. Dozens of key innovations, patents and strategic partnerships that Damien had publicly claimed as his own vision had originated in detail from her private notes. She had been the ghost in his machine, the architect of his throne. At 7 a.m., Jessica arrived, looking sharp and alert in a navy blue suit. She carried a briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Catherine, her eyes scanning her friend's face. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed. "Sleep is a luxury for peacetime, Jess," Catherine replied, taking a sip of the coffee. "Did you make the call?" Jessica nodded, setting her briefcase on the mahogany desk. "It wasn't easy. Alexander Sterling's schedule is locked down tighter than Fort Knox, but the name Vance, coupled with urgent, time-sensitive intelligence on Blackwood Innovations, got his attention. He's cleared his calendar. We have a meeting at his office, 10 a.m. sharp." "Good," Catherine said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "That gives us time to prepare the presentation." "Kat, are you sure about this?" Jessica asked, her professional caution warring with her personal loyalty. "Going to Sterling. It's like handing a starving wolf the keys to the henhouse. Once you let him in, you can't control what he does." "I'm not looking for control, Jess. I'm looking for a wrecking ball," Catherine stated coldly. "Damien respects only one thing: power, financial power. I'm going to bring a power to his door, so overwhelming that he'll have no choice but to bow. Alexander Sterling is not a partner. He is a weapon." She turned the laptop screen towards Jessica. For the next 2 hours, Catherine walked her friend through the vulnerabilities of Blackwood Innovations. She spoke with a passion and authority Jessica hadn't seen in years. This was the Catherine from Wharton, the brilliant strategist who could dissect a balance sheet like a surgeon. She explained how Damien's aggressive push into volatile markets had left the company dangerously exposed, how the inflated profit margins were hiding a growing debt crisis, and how their most recent flagship product, the Prometheus AI, was built on a flawed and unstable code base, a shortcut Damien had demanded against her explicit advice. "He's running a multi-billion-dollar company like a gambler on a hot streak," Catherine concluded, her voice steely. "But the streak is about to end, and I have the data to prove it." At 9:30 a.m. they left the Carlisle. Catherine wore the same black power suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. The faint bruise on her cheek was visible, unconcealed by makeup. It was not a mark of shame. It was a testament, a piece of evidence. Sterling Capital was located in a sleek, imposing skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a steel and glass needle aimed at the heavens. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all polished granite and hushed reverence. They were escorted to the top floor, to Alexander Sterling's private office. The man himself was waiting. Alexander Sterling was in his late 40s, with silvering temples and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was the antithesis of Damien. Where Damien was loud, Sterling was quiet. Where Damien wore his wealth like a costume, Sterling wore his bespoke suit with an air of complete, unstudied indifference. He radiated a calm, predatory confidence that was far more intimidating than Damien's bluster. He did not smile as they entered. He simply watched, his sharp gaze missing nothing. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low baritone. He gestured to the chairs opposite his vast, uncluttered desk. "Your lawyer's message was intriguing." His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the mark on her cheek, but his expression remained impassive. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I believe I have information that will be of significant value to you and your firm." She didn't wait for permission. She placed her laptop on the desk, opened it, and began. She didn't speak of her marriage, of the gala, of the slap. She spoke the language he understood: numbers, data, and strategy. She laid bare the weaknesses of Blackwood Innovations with clinical precision. She presented the inflated earnings reports next to the real, grim figures from her hard drive. She detailed the structural flaws in the Prometheus AI, predicting a catastrophic failure within the next 6 months that would trigger a massive stock devaluation. Finally, she brought up her masterstroke. Damien is currently in final negotiations to acquire a smaller AI firm, Cygnus AI, for $2 billion, she explained, displaying the confidential deal memo she had downloaded. He sees it as a vanity project, but my analysis shows that Cygnus AI's patent portfolio, when combined with Blackwood's existing infrastructure, doesn't create synergy. It creates a redundancy that will cost $500 million in restructuring alone. He is paying a premium for a company whose core technology will be obsolete within 18 months. He is hemorrhaging capital for ego. Alexander Sterling leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled. He had not interrupted her once. He had simply listened, his sharp eyes following every chart, every projection. The silence in the room was absolute. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, the single word carrying more weight than a dozen compliments. "You're suggesting Blackwood is a house of cards." "I'm stating it as a fact," Catherine corrected him gently. "And I'm offering you the opportunity to be the one holding the fan when it comes time to blow." Sterling leaned back in his chair, his gaze analytical, searching. "Why come to me? You're his wife. A messy divorce. You could take him for half. Why burn the whole kingdom down?" For the first time, Catherine allowed a flicker of personal history to enter her voice. "Because I helped build that kingdom, Mr. Sterling, and my name is not on a single brick. Damien Blackwood believes he is the sole architect. He has forgotten the importance of a strong foundation. I am not here for alimony. I'm not here for a settlement." She paused, letting her words hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. "I am here for equity. I will provide you with the blueprint to acquire his company at a fraction of its current market value. In return, when Sterling Capital takes control, I want a senior executive position, a seat on the new board, and a significant stake in the restructured company. I am not selling my revenge, Mr. Sterling. I am leveraging my intellectual property." Alexander Sterling looked at her, and for the first time, a slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing a fellow hunter. He wasn't looking at a scorned wife. He was looking at his next, and perhaps most brilliant, business partner. "Ms. Vance," he said, extending a hand across the desk. "I believe we have a deal." Damien Blackwood arrived at the headquarters of Blackwood Innovations at 9 a.m., feeling triumphant. The night had been a blur of champagne and fawning admirers after Catherine's dramatic exit. Serafina had been suitably impressed by his show of strength, and her flattery had soothed his bruised ego. He'd woken up that morning with a mild hangover and a sense of righteous indignation. Catherine's disobedience had been a public embarrassment, but he had handled it. He had put her in her place. He expected she was holed up in some hotel, crying, ready to come crawling back with a tearful apology. He'd make her sweat for a day or two before graciously allowing her to return. He strode through the gleaming lobby, nodding curtly at the employees who scurried out of his way. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood," they'd murmur. He was the king in his castle, the master of his universe. His executive assistant, a perpetually nervous young woman named Clara, met him at his office door. "Good morning, sir. The board members are assembling for the 10 a.m. emergency meeting you called." "Excellent," Damien said, tossing his coat onto a chair. He'd called the meeting to fast-track the Cygnus AI acquisition, a move that would splash his face across every business journal. It was the perfect way to bury the gossip from last night's gala under a headline of corporate conquest. "Any messages?" "Your wife's lawyer called, sir. Jessica Riley," Clara said, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "She said to inform you that Mrs. Blackwood, that Ms. Vance, would be attending the board meeting." Damien laughed, a short, sharp bark. "What? Is she coming to apologize in front of the board? A little dramatic, even for her." He dismissed the thought. She was probably bluffing, trying to rattle him. "Fine, let her come. It will be educational for her." At precisely 10 a.m., Damien entered the boardroom on the 50th floor. The room was designed to intimidate, with a long, black granite table and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. His board was assembled, a collection of stern, grey-haired men he'd carefully selected for their pliability. Marcus Thorne, the COO, sat among them, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't meet Damien's eye. "Good morning, gentlemen," Damien began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I've called you here today to finalize our acquisition of—" The boardroom doors swung open. Damien stopped mid-sentence, an annoyed frown forming on his face. And then he saw her. Catherine stood in the doorway. She was not the woman he had slapped last night. This was a different person entirely. Dressed in her severe black suit, her face composed and resolute, she radiated an aura of unshakable power. The bruise on her cheek was a stark, silent accusation. But she was not alone. Behind her stood Alexander Sterling. A wave of confusion and alarm rippled through the boardroom. Alexander Sterling was their rival, their boogeyman, the shark that circled their waters. His presence here was inexplicable, a violation of the natural order. "Catherine?" Damien stammered, his bravado vanishing in a puff of smoke. "What is this? What is he doing here?" "Good morning, Damien. Gentlemen," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady as she walked into the room. She didn't take a seat. Instead, she stood at the opposite end of the table, commanding the room's attention. Alexander Sterling stood slightly behind her, a silent, imposing presence. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am here today not as your wife, Damien, but as a representative of a new business proposal. Mr. Sterling is here as my associate." Damien gaped at her. "Business proposal? What are you talking about? This is a private board meeting." "It's about to become a very public one if you don't listen," Catherine said calmly. She nodded to Jessica Riley, who had followed them in, and began handing a thick, bound document to each board member. "Please take a look at the portfolio in front of you. It's an offer from Sterling Capital." The board members, their faces a mixture of confusion and intrigue, began to flip through the pages. A stunned silence descended upon the room, broken only by the rustle of paper. Damien stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. "An offer? An offer for what? This is absurd. Security, get them out of here." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Blackwood," Alexander Sterling spoke for the first time, his voice dangerously soft. "Because the document your board is currently reading is a preliminary, but very generous, tender offer to acquire a controlling interest in Blackwood Innovations." The blood drained from Damien's face. "Acquire? You can't. Our stock is at an all-time high. Our valuation is a fantasy," Catherine cut in, her voice sharp as a razor. "And that is why I am here." For the next 20 minutes, Catherine systematically and dispassionately dismantled the company she had helped build. She projected charts and figures onto the room's main screen from her laptop. She exposed the creative accounting, the hidden debt, the precarious market position. She walked them through the technical flaws of the Prometheus AI, predicting its inevitable and costly failure. Her delivery was flawless, her command of the facts absolute. The board members stared, mesmerized and horrified, as the woman they had only ever known as the CEO's quiet, pretty wife revealed herself to be the true master of their company's universe. And finally, Catherine said, her gaze locking onto Damien's, the Cygnus AI acquisition. She displayed the internal memo on the screen. A $2 billion vanity project that will indebt this company for a decade to acquire redundant technology. An act of such profound fiscal irresponsibility that it borders on corporate malfeasance. Robert Chen, the investor who had been present at the gala, looked up from the portfolio, his face grim. The offer from Sterling Capital is 30% above current market value. Given the irregularities Ms. Vance has just presented, this isn't just a generous offer. It's a lifeline. "This is ridiculous," Damien roared, slamming his fist on the table. "She's a liar, a bitter, scorned woman trying to destroy me." He turned on Catherine. "You did this? To get back at me for last night?" Catherine looked him dead in the eye. The entire room held its breath. "Last night was not the reason, Damien," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "It was merely the permission slip I gave myself to do what was necessary. You built this company on my intellect, my strategies and my work. And when you were done, you decided I was disposable." She gestured to the board. "I am simply demonstrating my value. The value you forgot." She turned back to the stunned board members. "Gentlemen, Sterling Capital's offer is on the table for the next 48 hours. It is conditional on the immediate removal of Damien Blackwood as CEO and the cessation of the Cygnus AI acquisition. Should you accept, I will be overseeing the transition as part of the new management team. I know where the bodies are buried. I also know where the treasure is." She closed her laptop. The presentation was over. Damien stood, shaking with a rage that rendered him speechless. He looked at the faces of his board, men he thought he owned, and saw not loyalty, but cold, hard calculation. He saw them looking from his trembling form to Catherine's steel composure, and he knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that he had already lost. Catherine and Alexander Sterling turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a bomb of their own making to detonate behind them. The fallout from the boardroom blitz was swift and brutal. Damien's world, once an impenetrable fortress of wealth and power, began to crumble with terrifying speed. He stormed out of the boardroom after Catherine and Sterling, his mind a maelstrom of fury and disbelief. He tried to rally his board, appealing to their loyalty, to their shared history, but it was useless. He was no longer speaking to friends. He was speaking to businessmen who had just been shown a lifeboat as their ship was taking on water. "Damien, be reasonable," Robert Chen had told him, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The woman just proved with data that our stock is overvalued by at least 40%. Sterling is offering a premium on that inflated price. If we refuse, and this information leaks, which it inevitably will, we'll be facing shareholder lawsuits that will tie us up in court for years. She's checkmated you." His first frantic call was to Serafina. He needed her comfort, her validation, her adoration. He found her at her apartment, surrounded by packed Louis Vuitton luggage. "What's all this?" he demanded, his voice strained. "Are you going somewhere?" Serafina didn't look up from a box of jewelry she was sorting. "I'm going to Milan for a few weeks. A new contract," she said, her tone cool and distant. "Milan? Now? I need you here," he exclaimed. "Catherine, she's trying to destroy me. She went to Alexander Sterling." Serafina finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I heard. It's all over the financial news feeds already. Sterling Capital launches hostile takeover bid for Blackwood Innovations." She shrugged, a delicate, dismissive gesture. "It sounds messy." "Messy? It's a war. And I need you by my side. We're a power couple, remember?" A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Damien, darling," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We were a power couple when you had power. I attached myself to a rising star, not a falling one. A CEO in the middle of a hostile takeover, with his brilliant wife leading the charge against him. That's not a good look. It's embarrassing." The word hit him harder than the slap he'd delivered to Catherine. Embarrassing. That's what he was to her now. He realized with sickening clarity that he had never been more than a stepping stone, a means to an end. Her affection had been a transaction, and his value had just plummeted. "So that's it? You're just leaving?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Don't be so dramatic," she said, snapping the jewelry box shut. "Think of it as a strategic retreat. Call me when you've sorted out all of this." She brushed past him, her expensive perfume a final, cloying insult. He knew she would never answer his call. The rat was leaving the sinking ship. His next blow came from within his own company. He tried to lock down the company's servers, to hide the evidence Catherine had presented, but it was too late. He received a call from Marcus Thorne. "Marcus, I need you to initiate a digital lockdown. Erase the R&D logs from the last 6 months. Shred the quarterly variance reports." "I can't do that, Damien." Marcus's voice was firm, laced with a new kind of confidence. "What do you mean you can't? I'm still the CEO of this company. You work for me." "No, Damien, I work for the company, for the shareholders. And right now, the best thing for this company is a smooth transition of power," Marcus said. There was a pause. "I've already provided Ms. Vance and Mr. Sterling's legal team with the supplementary data they requested. The server logs, the internal emails, all of it. It corroborates her entire presentation." The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that Damien couldn't even speak. Marcus, his loyal COO, the man he'd promoted and trusted for years, had turned on him. "Why, Marcus?" he finally whispered. "Because she was right," Marcus said simply. "About everything. About the flawed code, about the Cygnus deal, about you. You stopped listening a long time ago, Damien. You were going to run this company into the ground out of sheer ego. Catherine, Ms. Vance, she's saving it, and all of our jobs along with it. I'm sorry, but my loyalty is to the house she built, not to the man who was trying to burn it down." The final nail in his coffin was the media. The story was too juicy to ignore. "Billionaire CEO's wife teams with rival to seize control of empire," screamed the headlines. They painted Catherine as a wronged genius, a strategic mastermind reclaiming her legacy. They dug into her past, her academic achievements at Wharton, her early, uncredited role in the company's founding. She became a feminist icon overnight. Damien, in contrast, was portrayed as a fool and a brutish tyrant, the man who slapped his wife and lost his empire in the same week. The photo of Catherine leaving the gala, her face resolute, was plastered everywhere. The faint bruise was a symbol of his downfall. He holed up in his penthouse, the glass walls that had once felt like a symbol of his dominance, now feeling like a cage. He watched the stock ticker for Blackwood Innovations. The board, facing overwhelming pressure, had publicly announced they were entering into negotiations with Sterling Capital. The stock price, after a brief, panicked dip, had soared on the news of the acquisition and the promise of new, competent leadership. He was undone, utterly and completely. He had underestimated the woman who stood beside him for 10 years. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her grace for weakness. He had thought she was an accessory, a beautiful object to be displayed and, when necessary, disciplined. He never realized she was the queen, and he had just been a pawn in her long, patient game. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the final, crushing silence of defeat. The 48 hours that followed the boardroom meeting were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and high-stakes negotiations, but the outcome was never in doubt. With Marcus Thorne's cooperation and the irrefutable data Catherine had provided, the board of Blackwood Innovations had no choice. They voted unanimously to accept Sterling Capital's offer. Damien Blackwood was officially and ignominiously terminated as CEO, forced to sell his shares as part of the deal. He was given a severance package dictated by the ironclad prenuptial agreement Catherine had insisted upon years ago, an agreement he had laughed at the time. It protected all premarital assets and intellectual property. As she was the source of nearly all the company's foundational IP, he was left with a fraction of the fortune he once commanded. He was still a rich man, but he was no longer a king. He was just another wealthy, forgotten casualty of Wall Street. The day the deal was finalized, Catherine walked back into the headquarters of the company she had built, not as the CEO's wife, but as the new Chief Strategy Officer and a member of the board of directors for the newly formed entity, Sterling Blackwood. The atmosphere was electric. Employees who had once averted their eyes from her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. She was no longer a phantom in the hallways. She was the acknowledged power. Her first act was to call a company-wide town hall meeting. Standing on a stage in the building's atrium, she looked out at the hundreds of faces staring up at her. She didn't gloat. She didn't mention Damien's name. She spoke of the future. For too long, this company has chased short-term gains and fleeting headlines, she began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. We have prioritized image over innovation, ego over excellence. That era is over. Starting today, we are returning to the principles that once made us great: sustainable growth, fearless research, and a commitment to building technology that lasts. She laid out her vision, a clear, concise, and brilliant roadmap for the company's next 5 years. She announced the immediate cancellation of the disastrous Cygnus AI acquisition, redirecting the funds into internal R&D and promoting several talented engineers whom Damien had overlooked. She answered questions from the floor with a depth of knowledge and a clarity of purpose that left no one in doubt as to who was now in charge. Marcus Thorne, who she had promoted to president and COO, stood by her side, a look of profound respect on his face. Later that day, she met with Alexander Sterling in her new office, the very office Damien had once occupied. It was already being transformed. The cold, minimalist furniture was being replaced with warmer, more functional pieces. The ostentatious modern art was gone, replaced with whiteboards covered in strategic diagrams. "A good first day, Miss Vance," Alexander said, leaning against the doorframe, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Please call me Catherine," she replied, looking up from a budget report. "Catherine," he acknowledged with a small smile. "The markets have responded well. The analysts are calling this the most elegant corporate takeover in a decade." "It wasn't about elegance," she said, her expression serious. "It was about correction, restoring balance." "Perhaps," he conceded, but you can't deny there's a certain poetry to it." He looked at her, his usual predatory gaze softened by something else. Admiration. "I've acquired dozens of companies in my career. It's usually a bloody, messy affair. But with you, it was like watching a surgeon at work. You didn't use a cudgel, you used a scalpel." "Damien was the architect of his own downfall," Catherine said, unwilling to take full credit for his self-destruction. "I simply pointed out the structural flaws to the demolition team." Alexander chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. "A modest surgeon, then. I have a feeling this is going to be a very profitable partnership, Catherine." Their relationship remained strictly professional, yet a powerful current of mutual respect flowed between them. He valued her intellect, her foresight, her unwavering composure. She valued his decisiveness, his vast resources, and the fact that he never once underestimated her. He didn't see a woman. He saw a brilliant mind, a formidable ally. For Catherine, after a decade of being treated as an accessory, that respect was more valuable than any romance. That evening, she did not return to a hotel suite. She had purchased a beautiful brownstone in the West Village, a place with character and warmth, filled with books and art that she loved. It was hers, bought with the first payment from her new, staggering salary and signing bonus. As she unlocked her own front door, carrying a bag of groceries, a sense of profound peace washed over her. She wasn't just reclaiming her company, she was reclaiming her life, her name, her identity. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down and reforged into a key. The new dawn wasn't just for Sterling Blackwood. It was for Catherine Vance. And it was just beginning. 6 months passed. The transition at Sterling Blackwood was not just smooth, it was transformative. Under Catherine's strategic guidance and Marcus's operational management, the company flourished. She dismantled Damien's reckless projects, stabilized the company's finances, and fostered a new culture of genuine innovation. The flawed Prometheus AI was scrapped, and a new, more stable and powerful version, codenamed Phoenix, was already in development. Built on the solid foundation of her original architectural plans, the company's stock price didn't just recover, it reached unprecedented new heights. Catherine Vance became a legend in the business world. She was the subject of a glowing cover story in Forbes magazine titled "The Architect: How Catherine Vance Rebuilt Her Empire." The article detailed her quiet but crucial role in the founding of Blackwood Innovations and her masterful strategy in seizing control. The accompanying photograph was of her in the new boardroom, poised and powerful, with Alexander Sterling looking on with clear admiration. She was no longer defined by her relationship with Damien. He was now a footnote in her story. Her relationship with Alexander had deepened into a formidable professional partnership and a quiet, budding friendship. They were intellectual equals who challenged and respected one another. There were hints of something more, shared dinners that lasted for hours, conversations that strayed from business to art, philosophy, and their pasts. But they were in no rush. For the first time in a long time, Catherine was building something for herself, on her own terms, and she was savoring every moment. One crisp autumn afternoon, Damien Blackwood sat alone at an outdoor cafe in a quiet, forgotten corner of Soho. His world had shrunk dramatically. The sycophants and hangers-on had vanished along with his CEO title. His invitations to galas and exclusive parties had dried up. He was a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very events he once dominated. Serafina had never called. He'd seen her once, photographed on the arm of a much older, much richer European industrialist. She hadn't even given him a second glance. He was scrolling through the news on his phone when he saw it. the cover of Forbes. He stared at the image of Catherine, his Catherine, looking more regal and confident than he had ever seen her. He read the headline, "The Architect." The word twisted in his gut. He read excerpts from the article, quotes from Marcus Thorne praising her vision, from industry analysts lauding her genius, from Alexander Sterling calling her his most valuable asset. There was a small, bitter paragraph about him, describing him as the ousted founder whose aggressive but reckless leadership had nearly ruined the company. He was the villain in her heroic tale. As he sat there, a wave of cold, hard clarity washed over him. He had never truly seen her. He had seen a wife, an assistant, a reflection of his own success. He had never seen the brilliant, formidable woman who had been standing beside him all along, holding up the pillars of his kingdom. The slap had not been a show of strength. It had been an act of catastrophic weakness, the desperate lashing out of an insecure man terrified of the power his wife quietly wielded. He looked up from his phone just as a black town car pulled up to the curb across the street. The rear door opened and Catherine stepped out, followed by Alexander Sterling. They were laughing about something, their heads close together. They were heading into a renowned art gallery. She looked radiant, energized, free. She didn't see him. He was invisible to her now, a ghost from a past life she had shed completely. He watched as Alexander held the gallery door open for her, the gesture one of casual, genuine respect. As she passed through the doorway, she turned and gave him a smile, not the practiced, polite smile she had worn for a decade as Mrs. Blackwood, but a real, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. Damien felt a profound, aching emptiness that had nothing to do with money or status. It was the realization of what he had truly lost. He hadn't just lost a company. He had thrown away the one person who had seen greatness in him and had dedicated her own genius to making it a reality. He had shattered the most valuable thing he ever had, not with a single slap, but with 1,000 cuts of ego and neglect. He was left with his diminished fortune and his cavernous, empty penthouse. She had the company, the respect of her peers, and a future she was building for herself. The final reckoning was not a dramatic confrontation or a shouted argument. It was this, a quiet, undeniable truth settling upon him in a lonely cafe. He had slapped his wife to please his mistress, and the next day she had arrived with an army and calmly, methodically, taken back the world she had built, and he had no one to blame but himself. And so, Catherine Vance's story becomes a powerful lesson in value, respect, and the quiet strength that so many people underestimate. It's a reminder that the silent partner in the room is often the most powerful, and that true strength isn't about raising your voice or your hand, but about knowing your worth and having the courage to claim it. Damien Blackwood thought he was breaking his wife, but he only succeeded in breaking the chains that held back a titan. She didn't seek simple revenge. She sought reclamation, building a brighter future from the ashes of a painful past. What did you think of Catherine's incredible transformation? Was her boardroom takeover the ultimate power move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of resilience and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And of course, for more compelling stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thank you for listening.